Okay, so hi everybody. Today is Tuesday, July 30th. You are all at the Kubernetes SIG Testing weekly meeting, but maybe not weekly for long. I don't know. Um, and you are being recorded and can watch yourselves adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct on YouTube later, where you're all being your very best selves and not being jerks. Today on the agenda, Cole's going to show us this new workflow he's been working on to sort of test proud jobs locally using, among other things, Kind. I wanted to give an update on the doodle I sent out about maybe a different meeting time or meeting cadence. And Alvaro wants to talk about sort of how should we be spreading the business logic around our binaries. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Cole, assuming you are ready to go.
Well, I don't know if I am, because since I came in this morning, I've been having problems with my Docker daemon. So I can't run any Docker containers properly right now. I don't know what's going on.
Oh no.
Yeah. It's running on Sean's machine earlier.
Do you have any sort of issue or doc you want to maybe sort of walk us through to describe?
Yeah, I can at least walk through what it will do or what it should be doing when things are working. Let's see. Show my screen.
Cool, I see a web browser.
Okay, cool. So here's the file that it will be of most use.
That looks better.
Okay. Yeah, so this file is super simple. I imagine that this file or one similar to it can be copied around to different Prow repos that have Prow config in them. And the only things that we'll need to change are these two lines that specify the config path and job config path. And potentially there's also some extra variables that can be provided that have reasonable defaults. And other repos, instead of just calling this this script will then call the actual script here. Other repos will curl the latest one because it won't exist inside the repo. And the reason I have this separate is just so that a repo can provide a wrapper around this the actual script with all the proper defaults that are specific to the repo. So then the actual script, which has the same name, lives in the Prow directory. Let's see. So it starts off by loading some arguments, and then it ensures an install, which means that it checks out a couple different tools. In particular, it gets our make PJ tool from Prow, which creates a Prow job based on config, so it creates the actual Prow job YAML resource. And then it gets the make pod resource or tool, which creates a pod YAML resource from a Prow job resource, which includes all the decoration steps. And then it also gets Kind and sets up a Kind cluster called makepod. And it mounts the node in that Kind cluster to an output directory. Then from there, we create a Prow job and use makepod after that to create a pod from the Prow job. And the one thing of interest here is that we use this local flag. And local is a new feature to the pod utilities that instead of, it essentially runs the GCS upload functionality in a dry run mode. So instead of uploading to GCS, files are outputted locally. And in particular, they're outputted to the directory that we mounted through in the Kind node. And then using kubectl, the pod is applied to the Kind cluster and it's watched. So what this looks like is when you run this command, you either run this that one that I just showed with a bunch of arguments, or you run the wrapped version here. And you'd run something like pj on kind.sh pull testin for a YAML or YAML in. And that would create the Prow job, create a pod from the Prow job, and deploy that to the Kind cluster. And assuming these tools are already installed, which they will be after the first time you run it, that goes really quickly. And tools like MakePJ include some interactive prompts. So if there's things like if you create a pre-submit job, it will ask you which, it'll interactively ask you which pull request you want to point to. Similar for post-submit jobs, it'll ask you which SHA you want to use. And there's one additional feature, which is that sometimes when you run these prow jobs, they're going to have volumes that won't exist in the kind cluster. For example, if there are some service account volumes that are mounted in, or some secrets that to access other clusters, those may only exist in the production cluster. So when you're running this tool, if there's any volumes that are not empty-dir or host path, it'll interactively prompt you to replace them. And you can either replace them with an empty-dir or specify a host path on your local machine. Or you can continue to use the existing value. And if you do that, you would just be expected to load the value into your kind cluster in advance.
Cool. Yeah, I know it's not a demo, but like I personally, just having gone through and trying to rewrite the Prow docs, sort of the cookbook for like, okay, here's how you write a job. Now here's how you test a job. Oh wait, before you can test a job, you actually need to stand up an entire Prow cluster over here, then make a build cluster, then set up GCS so that you got pod details correct, and then maybe you can finally figure out like what a decorated Prow job does. To go from that to like, just run this script and it will test your PR with your Prow job so you can see if it runs before you submit any changes is really awesome. So maybe we can do a demo when Cole has achieved victory over his computer yet again.
Yeah, I'll try and record one too or something to make sure that it's lasting and try and figure out what's going on here.
That's awesome.
One advantage, we have a tool that's similar to this already that's called Fano. The reason that I went this route is that it uses the MakePod and MakePJ utilities so that it's essentially using the same code that we use to generate things in production, or at least very close to it. So that should make things more consistent and prevent skew. And more importantly, it lets us use the pod utilities properly. So the pod utilities are like actually running and decorated around your job. So you get all the same environment variables provided and the same artifact uploads provided. So that seemed to be where we were encountering a lot of problems between skew with local testing before and with what Fano provided. So this makes sure that like all the exact git refs that you specify are checked out and any extra repos and all that kind of stuff.
Cool. Any questions for Cole? All right. Thanks, Cole. Will this end up replacing, will something like this end up replacing Fano?
I think so. I think Fano is going to be, like, it's certainly cool and a great start, but the main issue is that it doesn't have proper pod utility support. And since we expect everybody to be using that for their jobs, in particular, like the main difference, people don't really care about all the upload necessarily with local testing, but checking out the source code consistently and getting all the extra ref repos checked out, that was not really emulated, or at least not perfectly. So I think that this is going to be more consistent and like minimize skew between what's actually happening in production and what you're testing locally.
Yeah, I feel like at some point we'll probably want to have that chat about Bash versus Go.
Yeah, we can certainly convert this into something better. I had it this way because it's mainly calling out to a lot of other applications right now, and I figured that other people might also want to like add kubectl commands to deploy any secrets that their jobs might need or stuff like that. But we can certainly make more of these.
POSIX shell anyway, right?
Sorry, say that again, Steve.
We're probably going to end up rewriting the pod utilities using POSIX shell.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say which way that conversation was going to go. Sure. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm a total Bash noob too, so it's not good Bash. So I would be I should be converting this into something else.
Yeah, no, I think this was cool to like prove that this is in fact possible. Yet another place where we're putting kind at the center of all the things, which is great. yeah, and looking forward to developing faster with this. So next, I just wanted to real quick reveal this live if I can. Like, I don't actually know what the results of the doodle poll were, so you'll watch me unwrap the envelope. So it looks like there are a bunch of different choices that all have 12 check marks. So I didn't turn on the like yes, but if I, or yes only if I really have to, yes if need be, early on in the poll. But if I go based on the number of actual check marks that aren't that, it looks like Tuesday 10 to 11 Pacific biweekly is sort of where we want to land. Yay! Earlier time on Tuesdays, longer meeting, but less frequently. And my hope is this is a little friendlier to those of us who want to join from Europe or time zones that are not on the West Coast. So I will send out invites after this. The question I have for the group is, do you all want to meet next week, or do you want to meet 2 weeks from today?
So judging by the amount of topics on this agenda, I think skipping next week is fine.
Yeah, I agree. So I'll send out an invite, and thank you all for your input on that. So next on the agenda, Alvaro, also wearing a pretty awesome t-shirt, if I do say so myself, wants to talk about issue 13.440, which I will link in chat shortly. But Alvaro, it's all you.
Yeah, sorry, that I didn't put a link. So it's not actually an issue, it's a pull request. And it's one I did like 2 weeks ago, in which I added functionality in Synca to automatically delete pods for pro jobs, for pre-submit pro jobs that were created on a pull request that has a newer revision. In that case, the pro job gets put into state aborted, and so far nothing other than that happened. And I thought, that's pretty shitty. Let's clean up the pods because no one cares about the result. A couple of days later, a colleague of mine noticed that there's actually a configuration option for this already present, which defaults to false, which is why it didn't happen before. And then I posted this, and Ben mentioned that there are some jobs currently for the pro.kates.io instance that sort of rely on not getting terminated. And the interesting, or one of the interesting learnings of the whole thing is that even if we had tests for the whole thing and the current behavior, they would have continued to pass because this configuration option is on Plank and the change I did was on Synca. And the status quo is that we basically have the business logic for pro jobs with the Kubernetes agent spread among Plank and Synca. And I would suggest that we move everything related to pro jobs with the Kubernetes agent out of Synca and into Plank, just to make sure that we don't have this case of we basically need to run both if we want to have meaningful tests, because in reality what happens is what they both do, not what one of them does. And yeah, I guess I wanted to hear your opinions, if there are any objections to that idea, what do you think?
So do we have like a clearly defined separation of concerns between Syncer and everything else?
So I'm actually not super knowledgeable, but my impression was that Plank was all about like creating pods, given a proud job, and Syncer was all about deleting pods.
Right, and in that vein, should Syncer also delete builds and pipelines and
yeah.
I think there's a pretty clear boundary here, and I think, or at least what it should be. So I think Syncer should only do proud jobs, because that's the only resource that isn't managed by some other execution controller. Plank should manage pods entirely, their entire life cycle, and including their garbage collection. Build controller builds all of the garbage collection. The only thing that isn't covered by each controller handling its own garbage collection is the proud jobs themselves.
Yeah, so I agree.
That's for Syncer to only do proud jobs.
Okay. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think even before all this changes, like the Syncer was doing pod stuff, right?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but
That's back
Syncer,
when we only had pods, though. We didn't.
Yeah, right.
yeah. And it
Um,
only did cleanup of completed pods, I think, before. But yeah, that was why I ended up doing it in Syncer, not in Planck.
so I think like as far as the actual change you did, like it should be fine, right? Like I think we need to like go into the scalability jobs because if you're not using pod utils on the pod spec itself, there is a grace period for termination. And then if you are using pod utils, you not only have that option, but then you furthermore have like the entry point timeout grace period. So there's like absolutely no reason that if you have a long running termination process or a cleanup that takes forever, like you should be able to tell the system that that is the case so that we don't accidentally kill you. So your changes, like aborting it like that is a good idea. We should just
Okay, I actually think that's a new question because the one I initially asked was if we have objections to basically moving everything related to power jobs of Turquoise out of Syncer into Planck, and it seems that is not the case. And the second question that you now started, I think, is if we should have this behavior of cleaning up pods for power jobs that have a newer version basically by default or always, right?
Yeah. I think you should, because otherwise you end up like any job that's using cloud resources or like any third-party API, if the proud job is aborted and we don't care about its output, like we should terminate the pod so that we can free up that resource.
Yeah, I really agree. That's why I did the change in the first place. I mean, maybe I don't know how easy these scalability jobs are to fix. I have no knowledge at all about these things, but if we need this for some jobs, then this should absolutely be opt-in and not a default at the very least. And currently the default is to always keep pods even if we don't care at all about the result, and that's just doesn't make sense in my opinion.
So you're saying we should opt into keeping them?
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. We probably have to have a migration period with warnings about that, but if we want to make that change, I think that's a reasonable default.
For the for the scalability jobs, I think the 2 stumbling blocks was the first one. I'm not sure who is a subject matter expert there. Maybe Sham, and we should ask if those jobs are currently handling like SIG term correctly. So that's the first step, and then the second step would just be like literally writing down a grace period in the spec, just so the kubelet gives it time.
Yeah, but I think we can do the grace period, but we can't sell to infinity, so there will still be a hard limit.
Of course, right, and that's necessary for Proud to continue to have like a non-resource leaking build cluster. That's fine, but deprovisioning a scalability cluster shouldn't take an infinite amount of time either, right?
Okay, yeah, okay, sure, I agree. So would someone of you talk to the scalability folks, or how would we like make something happen there? Or would we just change it and add the grace period? What's the best next step there?
Aaron, do you have a good concept?
My mind was maybe somewhere else, and I'm not sure. So we want to suggest that the default behavior is sort of that of like, I think of it in terms of cascading deletes, right? Like if I delete a replication controller, I'm also going to end up deleting all its pods. Or sorry, if I delete a replica set, I delete all of the pods that are created as a result of that. If I delete a deployment, I end up deleting all the pods that are created as a result of that. But then there's also like, if I roll from one version to another within a deployment, I do actually keep the old replica sets around for some period of time so that I'm able to roll back if I want to. And this seems like a case where if I do something with a proud job, I may still want to keep the pod around for some amount of time. But what we're suggesting is that we want to, by default, say when we delete proud jobs, we also do a cascading delete and delete whatever it is that those created, whether that be a pod, a build, a pipeline. And help me understand, first, if I got that right, and second, why this impacts scalability.
I think so. The statement may not be that you want to keep the pods around if the proud job has been deleted, but more that that's the current behavior. And so in order for this to be easier to transition, we might want to keep that. And also, it's not a deletion on a proud job, but rather the transition between any state into aborted. The reason this impacts scalability jobs is I believe scalability jobs today are not configured correctly to expose to the kubelet the fact that their teardown takes a long time. So if those jobs get aborted and then we delete the pod, the kubelet defaults to like a couple seconds of grace period before it sends SIG kill. The scalability jobs haven't had time to deprovision everything and they end up leaking resources. So it's just a matter of like making sure that the jobs are honoring SIG term correctly and using that to trigger deprovisioning, and that they communicate how long they expect it to take.
Okay, that sounds like an issue to be opened against their jobs and to assign it to them and to sort of help explain to them what changes they need to make, yes.
Right, and so the question was like, do we make that issue in test infra, and if so, who are some good people to assign?
I would say Wojtek has been pretty active and doesn't seem to be taking vacation as much lately. I think he's one of the chairs of scalability. And go from there. Because I do believe there are more people working within scalability these days, but I trust Wojtek to be the appropriate HA proxy.
Alvaro, do you feel like you have enough context to make that issue and pass it off?
Yeah, I can create the issue and assign to Wojtek. Yeah, that works.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and he's over in Warsaw, so you two might get a collaboration that way anyway.
Yeah, that's actually helpful too.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I guess that's it from my point then.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to talk about? Or are we good to go for the next 4 minutes? Cool. If I had been more prepared, I would have walked us through stuff in our milestones. So these meetings usually happen at this time. Not cool, but what I'm going to do is reschedule them to happen 2 weeks from today, starting 3 hours earlier. I tried to say it that way because I don't know what your time zone is, but 3 hours earlier from when this meeting started, 2 weeks from today will be the next meeting, which would be Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific. Anybody? I see a couple names here that I don't necessarily recognize. Does anybody want to introduce themselves?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi everyone. So I've been to KubeCon China last year. So I attended a developer contribution kind of workshop. So I didn't get much time to start contributing. So I thought I play with Pro and so I thought this will be a good starting place to contribute. And it's been quite late right now. It's more than 1:50 a.m. here in Delhi, India. So the time was really good. That for me, it will be the right time.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. Our time thus far has not been the greatest. So I sent a link in chat to our contributing.md, which I just recently rewrote. And there are some links in there to all the issues we have that are labeled with good first issue and help wanted if you want some places to get started there. And then I feel like if you have any other questions or those don't look interesting to you, come talk to us on Slack in the SIG testing channel. And welcome. I think this is pretty awesome code, pretty awesome people.
Yeah, sure. I'll hit you on the Slack.
Cool. And welcome, Multiply. Look forward to hearing you introduce yourself some other time. All right, I think I'm going to call it. Thanks, everybody. Happy Tuesday, and see you all 2 weeks from today. Later.